So I just want to welcome everyone tonight to our second of 3 Zoom author talks for this grant that we have that is funded by the National Libraries of Medicine. And our initiative is called Central PA FUN, which stands for Food Understanding Nutrition. My name is Katie Greenleaf Martin, and I am the district consultant for the libraries in Blair, Bedford, and Huntington counties. And I'm here tonight with Josh McConnell, who's the Community Education and Information Services Librarian at the Altoona Library, and Barb Mitchell, who's the County Coordinator for the Cambria County Library System. And we want to thank our sponsors this evening, the National Institutes of Health and the National Library of Medicine, as well as the Middle Atlantic region of the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. As I said, as you think of questions, please submit them to the Q&A section. And we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight, joining us, I am very excited because we have Bryant Terry, and he is not only a James Beard Award-winning chef, but is also the chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And he is going to share with us some things from his books and some of his experiences. And so I'm very excited to begin that conversation tonight. And then at the end, we will have a little survey that we'll ask you guys to take after we've talked to you a little bit more about some of the resources that libraries do have available for health information. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Bryant, if you'd like to join me on video here. Excellent. And I will. Okay.
Hi.
Hello, Bryant. I'm sorry. I'm never used to the video controls. I apologize. So I'll give you just kind of a chance to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us anything that you think is relevant to knowing about you as a chef as we begin our conversation tonight.
Sure. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us. It's what, 4 p.m. here, so I know you guys could be doing a lot at the end of your day. So I do appreciate you coming here to hear me speak. I think the most important thing to know is that, while I'm a cookbook author and media celebrity and whatever else people see me as in this current moment, my work started off as a grassroots activist back in 2000 because I was deeply concerned about, really children and just the fact that, there's this reality where people across the country and communities across the country have very little access to healthy, fresh, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. But what has concerned me the most and what really catalyzed my interest in working on these issues was the fact that, younger people were starting to see a lot of the chronic illnesses that in decades past they wouldn't come up until people were in their 30s, 40s. The way in which young people are aggressively marketed some of the worst foods and worst drinks without any restrictions on the way that these multinational food corporations can do that. The fact that I often would see young people, in the morning on the subway train in New York City, eating lots of processed and packaged foods and drinking sugary beverages and energy drinks and whatever kind of, as Michael Pollan calls them, edible food-like substances they were consuming. And so I really wanted to do my part in pushing back against that. And I founded an organization called Be Healthy that work with young people. So that's how my work started.
Excellent.
Fast forward to now, I'm writing books and doing a lot of other things, but I do think it's important that people know that part of my background.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I wanted you to talk a little bit about, and I was going to do it later, but since you have brought it up, tell us a little bit about this concept of food justice and how that's been reflected in your work and in your activism.
Sure. Well, food justice recognizes, as I mentioned earlier, that we live in a country where everyone does not have access to the basic human right of healthy, fresh, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. There are many economic and geographic and physical barriers that prevent many communities from accessing this type of food. And one of the cornerstones of food justice is that the solutions to community food insecurity are owned and driven by those most impacted by these issues. And so the idea is that people living in these kind of historically marginalized communities, they understand what's missing. They want better for their communities, but they need resources and power in order to affect change. And so, um, you know, of course, if philanthropic organizations want to offer grants, if you have individuals of privilege who want to come into communities and help initiate organizations or projects that would then bring more community food security, that's fine. But the mission, the goal of any projects should be empowering the people who live in that community to then, if they hadn't been started by the people in those communities, to then run and operate those communities based on the continuing and ongoing needs of people living in communities.
I love that. So it's not only nutritionally aware, but also culturally aware.
Definitely.
Cool. Okay. So now I'm going to circle back to what was going to originally be my first question, which was, kind of how did you come to plant-based eating? And, what kind of suggestions or thoughts would you have for, I talk to a lot of people who aren't ready to take a deep dive where they're really restricting what foods they're eating, but they want to do, as Michael Pollan would say, eat mostly plants. So what are some of the things that you would suggest?
Well, one of the first things I suggest for people, because it's exciting seeing a lot more people who are interested in plant-based eating. I think oftentimes people get so caught up in the label or the dietary model that they forget to listen to their bodies. And I think that, we should be concerned with the exponential rise in chronic illnesses that are directly related to what we're eating. And it's exciting seeing that consciousness. But what happens when you have the kind of public health crisis that we're seeing in the United States is that a lot of people are rightfully so looking for solutions and looking for answers. And that's, one of the reasons that the diet industry is so lucrative, because people understand that something's wrong, they want to fix it, and oftentimes people are unaware of the tools that they need and are susceptible to a lot of suggestions and marketing and pitches from people who would argue that they have the panacea to better health. And I would argue that there is no panacea, there is no perfect diet. I can make arguments all day about the environmental, about the economic, about the ethical reasons why one should embrace a plant-based diet. But I'm not going to be the person to say eating vegan is the healthiest diet that we can have. We know, because there's a growing body of research that is very clear that eating a mostly plant-based diet can be very effective in helping to prevent chronic illnesses, in many cases ameliorate symptoms, and in some cases reversing some chronic illnesses. People should look at the work of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, a group in DC that does a lot on kind of studying and putting resources and research into looking at the benefits of plant-based diets. And so they have this, case studies about people who have, developed type 2 diabetes in their adult life. And then they switch to, low-fat plant-based diet, and then they're able to reverse it. So I'm not arguing that there isn't a positive impact. There can't be, I should say, a positive impact of, embracing a plant-based diet or a vegan diet. But I just want to underscore that there is no one perfect diet, that, we all have different, ages, health status, bodily constitution, cultural food ways, as you mentioned earlier. I truly believe that that's one of the kind of criteria that's sorely missing when we talk about like a healthful diet. I think we should be looking at the type of foods that our ancestors ate. What did our grandmother and great grandmothers eat before our industrialized food system that helped to sustain them for generations? And so, but I think we need to listen to our bodies. Our bodies are constantly changing and shifting. It may be perfect for me to be a strict vegan for 10 years. but then my body might be calling for something different. And I think it's
Mhm.
important to just listen to our bodies, listen to our team of people who are helping us to be healthy, whether it's our physician or dietitian or nutritionist, but not get so um, dogmatic about what we believe will be the healthiest thing for us, where it actually starts to become detrimental, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, so you mentioned your mothers and grandmothers and their grandmothers, and one of the things that I noted in one of your pieces that is that you say you're inspired by history and memory. So what are some of those memories, and what is some of that history of food and cooking in your family?
That's a great question. I grew up in Tennessee, so I live
Hmm.
in the Northern California in the Bay Area, but I grew up in the South. I grew up in Memphis, but my family actually had farms in rural Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas.
Oh,
And
wow.
so this ethos of, coming from smallholder farmers, coming from people who understood the importance and power of growing food for oneself, was always something that was embedded in me as a child. My paternal grandfather had effectively what was an urban farm in his backyard garden,
Hmm.
and all the grandkids had to be a part of helping out. I will admit now, through the lens of a parent as an adult, I'm very clear that our labor was being exploited. But I'll say that some of the most important lessons that I learned were in that garden
Hmm.
with my grandfather. And I always make it clear that the work that I'm doing as a chef, as an author, as an activist, as an educator, I really see myself standing on the shoulders of them, and
Hmm.
taking the lessons that I learned and kind of repackaging or representing in a modern context. But these are ancient lessons. These are things that, were passed down to my grandparents. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was the one who taught me to cook. And so spending time in her kitchen, by her side, and just kind of soaking in all these practices and lessons, from canning and pickling and preserving one's surplus and bounty so that you
Hmm.
had something in the leaner winter months, to slow food cooking. I think because of the um, formalized institution of Slow Food International, which started in Italy as kind of a counter narrative or pushback against industrialized food
Hmm.
coming into that country, specifically Rome. A lot of people imagine, when you hear that term slow food, people imagine, people living in Western Europe or even in the United States, because this organization has held a space in the more affluent kind of like, it's just been kind of a very elitist
Yeah.
organization in the way that it's playing out. And I just, I like to encourage people to reimagine these practices that many of our families had, that were just second nature. No one thought about it. No one said
Hmm.
anything about it because it was the way that people survived. But if you talk about slow food, my grandmother starting to cook Sunday supper on Saturday morning, that's slow food cooking.
Hmm.
My grandmother spending hours canning and pickling and preserving vegetables that she grew in her home garden, as well as ones that she got from, you know, trucks that pulled up on Saturday morning and opened up their bed and sold fresh produce, or the farmers market in downtown Memphis, adjacent to where they lived, or any of these things. These are the type of practices that specifically I think it's important for me to highlight the way in which African Americans had many
Yeah.
of these practices, kind of pushing back against these kind of paternalistic narratives that somehow Black folks need to be taught how to eat healthfully,
Right.
and recognizing that these are practices that have been a part of our communities, not just here, but if we look at the larger movement of food and plants and people in the diaspora
Hmm.
throughout the African continent, the Caribbean, as well as the United States.
Yeah, yeah, I think that concept, and I think I'm stealing this from one of your pieces, is the, kind of decolonizing these concepts of slow food, of superfoods, of good, healthy eating.
Yeah.
Um, and been interesting in, we live in a place that was colonized primarily by waves of German and Italian and Eastern European immigrants, and the ways that many of those traditions persist as well,
Mhm.
is interesting, and happens, I think, everywhere in the US in different ways. So it's really neat to celebrate all of those, absolutely all
Definitely,
of those traditions.
definitely. And
Uh,
yeah. So anyway, we'll
oh,
come.
go ahead.
I it's exciting to see many of the diverse food cultures in the United States that haven't gotten a lot of
Mm-hmm.
shine starting to be recognized. I just think about many of the chefs and writers who are starting to uplift Appalachian food
Mm-hmm.
and showing the ways in which, there are these same
Yeah.
kind of traditions that I think are often erased in terms of, you know, how we kind of popularly imagine people, these negative stereotypes of people living in Appalachia. But then, you uncover these histories. And as I said, these are histories and cultures that have sustained people for,
Mm-hmm.
generations. So,
And I think that it's neat how it's kind of tying into the foraging sort of renaissance as well. Is that something? I mean, I'm assuming in the Bay Area there's not as much foraging to be had. But
there's a
no,
lot of
oh, okay.
foraging we
So
had.
talk to me about a little bit about semi-urban foraging and how that looks in different communities.
Well, I live in Oakland, California,
Mhm.
and the neighborhood that I live in is 100 years ago. It was actually a fruit orchard.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
this
You have
whole
all those trees then.
Yeah, so because of the microclimates of the Bay Area, where just a few blocks over, it could be 3 degrees warmer. This area is about 5 degrees warmer than most parts of Oakland. And so it's really ripe for growing lots of things. One of the first things we did when we purchased our home was we built a 100 square foot raised bed in our front yard, and we built one in the backyard. And the front yard was important because we just felt like it was important to kind of announce ourselves and say that we're here, these are our values, and we believe in growing food and not growing a lawn. And
Hmm.
so when we started to get to know our neighborhood better, we found that there's just a plethora of forageable treats that I mean, literally. So I actually just created this recipe for Fine Cooking magazine, and it's called Saturday. What do I call it? Like Saturday Stroll, Foraging Stroll, or something like that.
Okay.
It is.
Cool.
It's literally designed using all ingredients that I foraged in our mostly our neighborhood, but then kind of going into like some forest to do things like forage for mushrooms.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, just in our home, we have a persimmon tree that
Oh.
is starting to sprout some leaves. It looks like we have a persimmon tree, we have a Meyer lemon tree, we have a mission fig tree, we have a peppercorn tree, which is interesting. I
Oh,
mean, we
wow.
haven't done it yet because we've gotten mixed signals about if it's ornamental or if we can actually use it. We need to bring an arborist in to confirm. But we have a pepper tree where we could literally
Oh.
harvest peppercorns, dry them, and then use them as a spice for our foods. In our neighborhood, you find cacti where you can harvest prickly pear, and I made like a
Mhm.
prickly pear sorbet in this menu. Everything from lemon balm to chamomile, to miner's lettuce to wild fennel,
Mhm.
and so it's something that I'm more interested in exploring. I'm
Mhm.
an amateur forager, but I do feel like, especially in uncertain times such as these, where a lot of people are experiencing economic instability and food
Yeah.
insecurity. I think it's a skill that people should know, and people should kind of break out of this idea that we have to spend our hard-earned money on food. Obviously, there's staples that I think it's pretty hard getting around, you know, buying olive oil. But in terms of a lot of the fresh bounty of the earth, there's a lot to be had. And I think people just need to be
Mhm.
educated and informed and have the skills to identify it and know what to do with it when they do harvest it.
Yeah. Well, and I think so many people are thinking about their lawns in that way, and what are ways we're in a monarch migration zone here, and so people are trying to plant many more even things like echinacea, which are also edible but that are pollinator food. Are there staples that you have always loved to grow that you would consider, I'm thinking about people, it's March. Our day for last frost isn't until the end of May. People are starting to plan their gardens. What are some of the things that you really enjoy growing at home?
Well, before I answer that, I do want to say that there are a number of organizations throughout the country that are focused on bringing more fresh food into urban centers.
Absolutely.
So, there are countless organizations. I think one of the most, I would say, just they're really leading the way. The food. Actually, I just want to show you guys something. Give me a second.
Sure. Visual aids. Very
Yeah.
exciting.
So, Growing Power is the organization, and the founder is Will Allen, who is a former um, basketball player, professional basketball player turned farmer, and he really,
Cool.
was bothered by the lack of food security in the community in which he lived,
Hmm.
and started this organization. And I mentioned them because they're primarily based in Wisconsin with outposts in Chicago. So, you're talking about the Midwest, you're talking about places where it literally freezes over, and
Hmm.
they're growing tons of food year
Hmm.
round through their indoor warehouses, through their aquaponics, they're,
Yeah.
farming fish. Not only are they producing this delicious, beautiful food for communities, they're employing young
Mm.
people, they're giving them skills related to food entrepreneurship and other areas that they can take into their adult lives. And they're beautifying the community. And so I say that to say that, you know, there are creative ways that people are figuring out how to
Hmm.
enhance local food systems
Hmm.
throughout the country all year round. In terms of my favorites, a lot of them are inspired by growing up in the South. Greens, I mean, our raised bed in the front yard is packed with mustard greens. And part of the reason that happened is because they seeded. Then all of a sudden, so we planted some stuff, and then all of a sudden it was just like mustard greens popping up everywhere.
Hmm.
So we do a lot of dark leafy greens, mustards, turnips, collards. During the summer, fresh tomatoes.
Yeah.
Like, one, tomatoes are so easy to grow. I tell people, if you want to just see yourself contributing to a local food system, produce a little bit of something for yourself, even if you don't have a lot of green space at home. The two things I tell people you can start with are fresh herbs. They're
Hmm.
very easy to grow. You can literally do them in your windowsill, in your kitchen, or in the bathroom. For God's sake, you
Hmm.
can like grow fresh herbs on your front porch. And the other thing I encourage people to experiment with are tomatoes. Tomatoes grow well in pots,
Hmm.
depending on the variety.
They have
They
those upside down hangy things that you can grow them in where they grow down instead of up. I love those.
those, and it's just great to be able to have, because tomatoes, especially like organic heirloom tomatoes, they can be expensive.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you can literally invest in, you know organic heirloom tomato seeds or starts at the beginning of the season, and it'll pay off for the rest of the year. That's growing season at least, and you won't have to go to the supermarket and pay for paper, cardboard tasting.
Yeah.
Because the thing, so I often do cooking demonstrations, and
Hmm.
when I talk about fresh food, I can be pretty like hardcore about like stay away from canned goods. Like this thing, those things are the devil. But there's one exception that I make, and they're canned tomatoes. And canned tomatoes, if you can get like a good, let me qualify and say a really good brand that makes organic canned tomatoes. Because the thing about tomatoes, like the best brands, and Muir Glen is one
Hmm.
that I prefer. They make really good ones. They harvest the tomatoes at their peak of freshness, and then they can them, and then they'll show up in your store. I'd much rather have those type of canned tomatoes than fresh tomatoes that you get in the dead of winter that have been shipped from California. And I'm talking about like when I go visit my parents who live in Alabama, and then I go to the store and they have fresh tomatoes, but the tomatoes have been shipped from California. They have to harvest them before they're fully ripe in
Mhm.
order to make the trip across the country. And they're sitting in these refrigerated trucks and refrigerators in the supermarkets for, days or weeks. And then they just taste like paper card or paper card, hard paper. What is it? What do you call it?
Cardboard,
Cardboard.
paperboard. Yeah.
Cardboard. They taste like cardboard, and um, you can use tomatoes that are canned, and they're
Mhm.
going to use so much more flavor. So with soup, stews, things of that nature, don't hesitate to use canned tomatoes. Obviously, if it's something that requires a fresh tomato, like a caprese salad or something, then don't use the canned ones. But yeah.
Yeah, they definitely are. They're fun to grow. That's definitely a good tip for beginners. So while we're on the subject of supermarket buys that you do and don't like, one of the things that I've noticed recently is the proliferation of plant-based proteins in grocery stores. And on the one hand, I love it because it's more plant-based protein. On the other hand, they seem pretty processed. So, tell us how you feel
Let's
about
get into it. Let's do it. No, so as I get older, I just feel like I'm getting a lot more chill about things like this. If you'd have called me a decade ago, I'd have been cursing somebody out talking about it. But the thing about those type of well, one, I think people need to understand that as much as these tech companies that are attempting to produce a lot of plant-based meats, um, I call them Franken meats. but, but what people need to understand is that there may be some positive impact on the environment, as we see more options for eating plant-based foods rather than the industrialized meat that most of us eat. The objective of these companies ultimately is to get rich. They're trying to make a lot of money for their shareholders, and so people need to understand that that profit motive is like in the fore from them. Not to say that some of these people, the founders and people who are part of these companies, don't personally have some good politics or want to create products or you know do things that are better for the world, but just structurally, that's the role of corporations, is to make money to enrich their shareholders. And so we're going to see a lot more of these products cropping up because there's a growing market of people who are looking for more plant-based options. And the thing about these type of products, a lot of them, like I'm thinking about like Impossible Burger or
Mhm.
the Beyond Burger, they're not actually aggressively marketed towards people who already have a vegan diet. They're thinking about expanding the markets because they know that people who have like plant-based diets, vegetarian, vegan diets, they're just hungry for any type of new options for eating good food. And so what the companies are doing, they want to expand their markets and make money, and so they're expanding the markets by looking at people who actually are meat eaters but are thinking more about the health benefits or the negative impact on health, the environment, the economy, from having mostly a diet replete with animal products. So I just feel like that we need to have that awareness, that
Mhm.
consciousness about um, the proliferation of products that are marketed as healthful or whatever terms they like to use that ultimately are marketing terms, because a lot of these terms don't have a legal definition that's relevant to the product itself. When you see things with labels like healthy, natural,
Mhm.
all these things, these are just marketing terms that there are very few restrictions around putting them on the products that they're aggressively selling to us. So that being said, I think that those type of foods are fun for transitional foods, people who
Mhm.
have like a standard American diet. they're really thinking about like making the steps towards eating a more healthful diet, a more ethical and more sustainable diet, then I feel like they're a great option for transitioning into a more plant-centered diet. Um, I think they're a cool option for people to occasionally have. Like I have tried, there's like this part of me that wants to enjoy the Possible Burger and the like Beyond Burger. It's hard for me to do because it's so meat like
Hmm.
that I can't even stomach it. Like when I'm eating it, it makes me feel like I'm eating ground beef. And so I've largely avoided them. There have been some that are like fake chicken sandwiches. For whatever reason, I can eat those. But the burger
Yeah.
that's engineered to look like it's bleeding, even though it's not real meat, I just can't do it. And so it's a matter of personal preference. But I need more fluidity and looseness, especially in this. That's been one of the main lessons that I learned over the past year is that I just want to enjoy life and I just want to have
Mhm.
fun. And I don't want to make people around me not enjoy life because of my own neuroses and dogmatism and just like this kind of strict.
Always, there's always something. We'll give him a minute. He looks like he's logged out and he'll log back in. So, and I do see that there is a question in the Q&A, so we can do that next. And then I'll get back to my list here. Thanks for those of you who are here with us. Please feel free to keep putting questions in the Q&A. I'd love to have some more questions to talk with Bryant here about. I have, of course, my own list of things that I would love to talk with him about. So it's great to have questions from other people as well.
And welcome back, Brian.
There we are. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I know I got kicked off. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We had power outages here last night. We had very, very bad windstorms. And so we were all feeling a little paranoid that it would be one of us. And who knows, it may yet be. So so you were talking about your lesson from 2020 is giving yourself more allowances to kind of
Just being more easygoing. I feel
yeah.
like that's been kind of like my mantra in life is just to be easygoing, enjoy life. You know, I think one of the big lessons I learned from last year is that, you know, life is precarious. I had 3 family members who passed in 2020.
Oh wow.
And, you know, it just helped me to be more clear about what I want to value and what's important to me. And it's just being happy and enjoying my family and not being hard on myself as my staunch Roman Catholic upbringing would have me.
That is also something that is very common in our area. It's been a big Catholic area, and so
Okay.
definitely contributes to the sort of cultural ethos. All right, I have a couple questions from the Q&A I want to throw at you, and then I want to come back to the family topics a little bit. So the first one we had, which is asking about, do you have any thoughts about why the keto diet is becoming so popular? And if you have any thoughts on if you know what benefits there may or may not be to a diet like that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be completely honest with you. And I tend not to toy with kind of fad diets, if you want to use that term. And I may be using it loosely, maybe not. But um, there was a point in 2019 where I felt like I was working out a lot. I was being very mindful of what I was eating. And I just felt like I was spinning my wheels in terms of like dropping some pounds as I wanted to do. And so I had some friends who were eating, you know, mostly a keto diet or kind of like full on embracing a keto diet. And they told me about it and told me about the benefits of it. And so I started experimenting with the keto diet. And I will say that I felt great. Like I felt like I probably felt better than I have in years when I was on that strict keto diet. It was challenging doing it plant-based because even, you know, there are a lot of carbohydrates in many of the legumes. And so under every day, even if I might have gone over those, what the diet did, because you're not eating any processed sugars, you're
Right.
mostly drinking water, because if you're drinking, I mean, even something like a nut-based milk, it has a lot of
It
carbs
has
in it
carbs,
that'll
yeah.
take you over the threshold. So at the core, my diet was very clean, just like lots of leafy greens, lots of, nuts, high protein nuts and nut butters and legumes, just like really nutrient dense. Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
No, it's okay. It only happens when something's going on.
Anyway, just to wrap up, it felt great. And, my physician and just the people who helped take care of me were like, okay, it's fine if you feel good, but I just felt like physiologically, I didn't want to maintain such a restrictive diet.
Mhm.
But the lessons that I learned were when I am keeping like simple carbs, sugars, you know, even I eat these healthy snacks, healthful snacks, red hot blue chips, and I know whatever these things they marketed me and I fall for it. Cutting those things out, it just made my overall, like, I just felt so much more energized and light and good. And so I'll talk, that's my personal experience. But what I always encourage people to do is keep a journal. Like when
Mhm.
you're, I even say just quarterly, have maybe a week where you're kind of noting what you're eating, how you're feeling, because you may need to incorporate more of some foods in your diet. You may need to restrict some foods, but I think especially when doing a diet that's, kind of like you're embracing a dietary model, I think it's important to like just document what's happening so that you can remember whatever physiological, emotional, spiritual changes you might feel, so that
Mhm.
you, or if it's not working for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that way you kind of have that to compare,
Mhm.
what it was like, the next week later when you're not doing it or when you're doing something different. Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. So I next have a baking substitution question, which is, what do you substitute for eggs in a cake? And I have been experimenting with vegan baking as well recently, so I will be curious as to your thoughts.
I don't do a lot of baking. It's
Okay.
a very like specific skill that I just haven't taken the time to really master. But when I do bake, and I do need an egg replacement, I will use flax seeds.
Mhm.
So you take fresh flax seeds, grind them, and then for every 1 tablespoon of the flaxseed powder, you combine it with 3 tablespoons of water, and then just kind of like vigorously whip that with a fork or a whisk. And then you set it in the refrigerator, and then let it just kind of congeal, and then that is your egg replacer.
Mhm. Yeah, I do that, and then I do also have a commercial egg replacer that is, I think, a combination of like taro starch and baking powder.
Nice.
So
How does it work?
it's better than the flaxseed egg in some things and not as good in others. It works pretty well. I like it in waffles because then you don't see the little flaxseed bits,
Mhm.
but I don't know that it behaves very
Mhm.
differently.
Yeah.
So our next question is back to the processed foods. So how do you feel about nutritional shakes that are offered by companies like Beachbody, Advocare, and 310 Nutrition?
I can't say I'm familiar with those companies,
Okay.
but I think it just depends on what they're putting in there and what the quality of the product is.
Mhm.
I probably have a shake like at least 3 or 4 times a week. However, I'm making the shake at home. I know exactly what's going into it. It's usually some type of nut milk with bananas and then some type of fruit, maybe blueberries or raspberries or pears or something, depending on what the season is, obviously. And then I have powders that I use. So I use like maca powder, which is supposed to be good for energy. I use spirulina, which has a lot of nutrients and micronutrients. I use a little flax powder or chia seeds in there. And so most, the stuff that I'm putting in there is just like real stuff. I know that when you go to some of these um, places that make, healthy shakes and things like that, they're using some, not all, but I see a lot of these protein powders
Mhm.
that have a lot of, my this is the mantra that I remind my daughter of every day, my two daughters. If you can't read if the ingredients are unfamiliar, then you probably don't want to eat them. And then, these multi-syllabic laboratory food names, once I see that, I'm like, this is not for me. And so I know a lot of those protein shakes and the supplements that they use have a lot of stuff in there. I'm not like against any powders or supplements, like I said, but I know exactly what they are. They're usually single use, like maca or spirulina or baobab powder. These combinations, I think you need to be leery of them. Then there probably are some clean ones out there that use mostly like dried grains and dried greens and things like that, but just check the label.
Absolutely. So I am so glad that you answered that question in that particular way, because I wanted to talk, we talked about your upbringing and your relationship with your grandparents and food. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit, and you write a lot about the role of food in your household now, and how you talk to your girls about food, and how you've tried to, pass this on.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, we were just talking about this the other night. My wife and my kids were having dinner, and we talked about how obsessive our family is over food, and how everyone isn't like that. And like when we're planning a trip, before we even think about any other type of landmarks we're looking at the restaurants. We're like, okay, let's see what the local restaurants are, what the reviews are. And so food's important to me. Food's important. I mean, obviously, this is my life's work. Food's very important to my wife. While she isn't a chef or works in the food world, she's a really talented cook. And that was one of the ways that we bonded when we first started dating, is, learning about each other through our cultural foods. She's Chinese American. And so she would be teaching me about, Chinese food and the diverse and complex food throughout China. But also she's pretty adept at Vietnamese and Thai and a couple other Asian cuisines. And so she would teach me about those. I would teach her about, African and Afro-Caribbean and African American cooking. And so not only did we get a chance to like know each other and bond as personal, as individuals, but we got a chance to teach each other about our cultural legacies and our histories and our ancestors. And that has been a powerful way for us to help our children know who they are. As mixed race kids, we want them to be fully embracing of both of their identities, and we try to think about ways that we can affect that in multiple ways. Like, they went to a Chinese and Japanese immersion preschool because language and culture are so connected. And when you know your language, you know who you are. And I'm like, I want them to know, or we agreed that we want them to be able to speak Chinese fluently, because, unfortunately, because of one drop rules during the period of enslavement, any black person who's mixed with another race, it's like the idea is that where if you have a little bit of black, you're just black. And I've seen a lot of people who kind of subsume their other identities because they're mixed race and they're mad. And so it's like, I'm black. But when I interacted with friends like that who don't fully embrace the other side, and I understand they're complicated reasons. Sometimes because their family rejected them, and they're like, like, I hate the white side of my family or the Asian side of my family because they didn't love me like I thought I should be loved as a child. So I get that. But I do think it's important that, because I feel like if you don't fully embrace all parts of yourself, then you're fractured, and we want them to be whole. And so food has been such an amazing way for them to just learn about who they are in many different aspects.
Yeah, and the way in which we are unique combinations of all different cultures, and for them to be able to celebrate the parts of that is fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, which is a little bit more prosaic and less philosophical, is, what do you put in their lunches? What are the kinds of things that they like to eat as kids? And as I don't know how strict everybody in your household is around plant-based eating, but I do think it's something that people have a concern about in terms of, picky eaters. I have a 7-year-old who will eat raw broccoli, but don't put a sandwich in front of him because it's two things touching. So what are some of the ways that you encourage them, and some of the things that work for you in terms of things like school lunches?
Yeah. Well, I'll say that outside of that early period, when they were just starting to be introduced to solid foods, we have never had this distinction of like the adult foods and the kid foods.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you eat what we eat. We all are eating the same things. Now we might make some type of modifications around like spice level and salt and things of that nature. But so that's the first thing. When we did start our oldest daughter on solid foods, we didn't introduce her to fruits for about 6 months. And
Okay.
I was adamant about that. My wife went along with it. But I just feel like fruits are easy to love. I mean, fruits are, if you're getting like local seasonal fruits, it's like nature's candy. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
not a big barrier over falling in love with fruits. But I do think that the American palate tends to be very simplistic. We often kind of have an aversion for different flavor palettes, like bitter, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like bitter is a flavor that's just not a part of the American palate. And we wanted our daughter to like fall in love with the diversity and complexity of vegetables. And so that's what we just fed her. And when she started fruits, she flipped out and lost her mind. But the point is,
Why didn't you tell me?
but we never had this problem with like, oh, our kid doesn't eat vegetables, and because she loved them. Now,
That's
I'll
awesome.
say this: with the second kid, we're like, whatever, pasta, bread, pizza, just eat. We don't know. We're doing
The
kids
places
now.
to
We're
be.
raising two kids. We don't have time for all that. And I admit I have to. I have some regrets about not implementing a similar kind of structure around her eating, because she's a very picky eater. But life happens and you're like, whatever, I'm just trying to get some food on this table. Just
Mm-hmm.
so.
Are there particular, like, especially protein kinds of things that
Oh,
are
no.
blended? Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, you asked.
I switched two questions together there.
You asked about lunches and meals. Well, because they've been, because of
Yeah.
COVID, shelter in place, we've just been here. We're
Mm-hmm.
finally, thank God. Oh my God, I cannot wait to get them back to school in 2
Yeah.
weeks. We finally decided to send them back because their school has been in session. My mother-in-law is a retired physician and epidemiologist, so she's been very clear that the data doesn't support
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
people back. But anyway, point is they just been eating what we eat at home. We've been eating the
Yeah.
type of meals that we would typically eat, leftovers for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
Just I don't know. We try to have a couple days per week where we're intentional about like we're gonna eat some type of like Asian food. We're gonna
Okay.
eat some Afro diasporic food, whether it's from Africa or Southern food from where I'm from. And they just eat good food like legumes, with lunches and things. Sometimes we'll try to simplify it and do things like sandwiches, which we typically don't eat, but just for the portability and ease,
Yeah.
we might do that. And so that's where we might get marinated tofu, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll like use that instead of whatever meat product, or
Mm-hmm.
doing creative things like actually like roasting vegetables and
Mm-hmm.
adding them to sandwiches. I think there are ways in which you can take these kind of traditional structures of foods that kids eat and just do these small changes that make them much more helpful. But also kids like this stuff, like when we do the sandwiches, we'll make some type of like pesto. And so that's the base.
Yeah.
And so you're like, sneaking in greens as a,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like you got the base of that. We'll take caramelize some onions, I'm just like kind of spitballing, but
Oh yeah.
like take some eggplant and then roast it and add
Mm-hmm.
some and it's like this delicious sandwich that's interesting. That's, I think the big thing for us is we just have to like put effort into it. If we're lazy, then the food will show it. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like it just looks like uninspired. But the big thing that's helped us to create more inspired meals for our kids especially when they're like going to school every day, is meal planning.
Yeah.
We'll take Saturday. We largely reserve, or part of the weekend, we reserve it for preparing for the following week. So going to the farmer's market on Saturday and then buying things with an eye on, the ingredients actually being made towards specific meals. So we come in, with loose ideas for what type of meals we want to get, buy the food, and then we often will make them in bulk so that we have like, we're making this stew, we'll do double the amount. And then we'll freeze part of it so that the following week we can have the same delicious stew, but without the labor. And so I think the biggest thing that's allowed us to feed our girls really healthful, delicious food is being intentional and doing the meal planning. Because when we're lazy, if we don't get to it, that's when, they just get whatever. But when we like put the effort into it, the meals look beautiful and colorful and bountiful and all that. Otherwise, it's just pasta and tomato sauce.
Yeah. And I think everybody has to kind of learn, some people, especially my European friends, they love to cook every day and that's what they want to do. And I'm the opposite, is I want to cook like twice a week. So finding out, that's what works for your family, and that's wonderful. Okay. Well, I've got one more question, and then I've got a couple of library resources that I want to demo for people. So if you guys have more questions, put them in the Q&A, so we can get them in here. But the question I want to...
Can I just say something though? When you talk about the Europeans cooking every day, I talk a lot about, it's funny because the other night I was telling my wife this story. I talk a lot about, the kind of like familial reasons that I'm so honored to do this work. I talk about the political impetus for me doing this work, but just on the kind of like, I don't know, family nourishment tip, one of the things that inspired me to go to culinary school was my ex-girlfriend was studying in London at the London School of Economics. And, I went to visit her, and she was staying with some friends of ours, a friend who went to college with her, who the dad is, he's the head of an architecture department at one of the top Ivy League schools in the country. But he was also a chef because he just decided in his 40s, he wanted to go to culinary school.
That's awesome.
And just add that to his repertoire. And so when I was visiting London and we would go over there to like, have dinner with them, I just was so impressed with someone who was able to make these really delicious and complicated and amazing meals for his family. And so I just was like, on a personal trip, I was like, I want to be able to do that. Like one day I want to be able to like, just kind of like impromptu make some brilliant meal and have my wife and kids praising me after that. So kind of a personal note about like, wow, I want to learn how to cook better. So.
Yeah. And that's, you have to find the ways that you are inspired, and that's absolutely true. That's really cool. Well, hopefully your wife and children are appropriately impressed.
Sometimes.
So the last question I wanted to ask you is, a lot of your books include playlists with the various menus and recipes, and I think you had some music going when we first came in here. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, when you're thinking about, and there's a for those of you who are getting the books in the mail, a lot of them went out today actually. There is on Spotify, there's a Vegetable Kingdom playlist. And so, what goes into that process for you of selecting music that goes with these individual menus and recipes?
Yeah, well, so since I started writing cookbooks, I've always thought about blending or bringing in my love of music. So this is my first book, Grub, Ideas for an Urban and Organic Kitchen. This is it, written with my friend and colleague, Anna LePay, forward by Eric Schlosser. And so, I would have, I don't know if you could see this. So this had menus, and with every menu, I would include a soundtrack of music that I, thought you might be playing if you're having a dinner party or people over or something. And the reason that I started doing that, they come from so there are two reasons that I do that. Well, let me say this. My latest book, Vegetable Kingdom, ever since that book, I've included music somehow. There's the suggested soundtrack after each recipe.
Each recipe. Okay, cool.
But then this was the first time that I actually decided to compile all the songs into an actual playlist that I have at the beginning of the book. So if you go to the beginning of the book, you can actually see every single song that I suggested in here. And firstly, I come from a musical family. My uncle Don Bryant, who was a pretty popular singer and songwriter back in the 60s and the 70s, just at 78, 79, almost 80 years old, got a Grammy nomination for his album that came out called I can't think of the name of it, but he got it for it's the best traditional blues album.
That's
and
wonderful.
So he's like constantly inspires me. But because of my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, who was a singer and had this traveling gospel quartet in the 1950s,
Oh, cool.
all of his kids were musical, from my uncle who just won the Grammy nomination to my mom who sings in the church choir. And so whenever we had family gatherings, there would be food and there would be music, one uncle playing the piano, my mom and her sisters like harmonizing, other brothers singing. And so they're just inseparable to me. I always think like, I just can't, like, even at home, like I get nervous if I'm eating a meal and there isn't music playing. So in terms of like my including them in the books, they come from the other reason that I decided to do that. Well, another, Jessica B. Harris, who is the preeminent historian on Black food, she would often have like playlists in the back of her books, kind of like suggesting songs.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of an homage to her. And I just, get obsessive about these things just in terms of like when I'm cooking, I will often have like a song that might catalyze an idea for a dish. And so when I'm writing the recipe and I'm testing it, I will have the song on for repeat for like hours. And my wife hates it, but it's just so central to my cookbook writing process now to have music, inform the actual writing. And so I want to share it with people. I want people to be a part of the journey that, actually of creating the book. And I just want to give people good music to listen to. So yes, please go to Spotify, type in Vegetable Kingdom. You'll find the playlist for, the one that's in the beginning of the book.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so exciting. And a great segue. While I am queuing up my slides here, can you tell us a little bit about the things that we're going to see from you in 2021?
Yes. Well, there's a major thing that I still can't talk about because I hadn't gotten permission to talk about it, but it's going to be game changing in terms of me getting more ability to support budding cookbook authors and writers and people who are really trying to find their way in this field.
Awesome.
I've been working on a book since last June called Black Food, which is a collection of recipes, art, and essays that I'm editing. And so that book will be out in October. So I'm really excited about that being published and being able to travel, fingers crossed, and promote it.
Yes. And is there something, one that you're a participant in that's coming out in March too? Am I remembering that correctly?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Something else. I think maybe an event that you're doing that I was looking at and not a book.
Oh yeah, probably. Well, I do want to say that there was an article that came out in the New York Times today about, I don't know if you guys got a chance to see this, but it was about how cookbooks shaped 2020 and just the different relationship that a lot of people have created with cookbooks because of the shelter in place.
Yeah.
And more people
that was the inspiration for us writing this grant, was so many more people are trying to cook more at home and cook more healthily at home with their family. So yeah, so that I will check that out, and we'll have to send that out to everybody who had signed up. Barb, make a note to put that in our next email push as well, because that's really relevant. So
yeah, please send that. The writer gives Vegetable Kingdom a big shout out because she mentions the growing interest among people eating more plant-based foods, not just for health, but for, a lot of people are starting to be more aware of the connection with what we're eating and how it's grown with the, climate chaos. When we're talking.
Yeah, and I think that just the ways that our food systems, especially our meat food system, has come into focus this year hasn't been real positive. So there's lots of momentum there. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, that is wonderful. I did not see that yet, but we will check that out. Bryant, thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm gonna do my little spiel, and then we will share our survey link. So you guys, the participants, thank you so much for being here. And that link will be in the chat, I believe. And I just want to mention, one of the things that we've been talking about in general is population health. And so one of the National Institutes of Health initiatives that sponsored this program is called the All of Us Research Program. And so that's an initiative where you can actually donate your medical records to help the National Institutes of Health do more longitudinal studies around population health and things like that. So it's very relevant to this program. And we do have links to that on our grant landing page, which you guys have all been emailed. The other couple of things that you will see linked on the library website, one of them is Medlineplus, which is a resource developed by the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. It's got a lot of great resources and a recipe search as well for you to explore some new ingredients maybe that you heard about today or other things like that. And it's got a ton of different health topics, a place to get really good, reliable health information, which can be hard to come by sometimes. Our next event is Tuesday, March 16th with Dr. Reshma Shah, same time, 7 p.m. And we look forward to seeing you all there. I will also note that one of the things we purchased with this grant was a database called A to Z Food America. And so it's got a lot about the different historical foodways of America and an ingredient search as well. So another way to explore some